Okay, picture this. It's November 2025. We're in Johannesburg for the first ever G20 Summit on African soil. This is a huge deal, history in the making. But behind all the handshakes and photo ops, a massive crisis is brewing. One of the G20's most powerful members, the United States, is a no-show. They're boycotting the whole thing. And this isn't because of some scheduling mix-up or a security threat. Nope. The reason is a lot simpler. They're furious. So, what's got them so upset? The host, South Africa, announced this bold vision for an African presidency, aiming to put the continent's priorities first. The US didn't just disagree, though. They mocked it. Senior officials started sarcastically calling it the G100, basically painting it as some crowded, disorganized circus. So how did a simple guest list manage to spark an international incident? I mean, really? But if you think this is just about some diplomatic spat or hurt feelings, you're missing the real story. This is actually a fight that's been 140 years in the making. Yeah, to really understand why South Africa's expanded guest list triggered such a backlash from the world's established powers, we need to rewind the clock. We have to look at the long history of who gets to make the rules. This pattern of exclusion goes way back. Just look at this timeline. In 1884, a bunch of European powers and the US get together in Berlin and literally carve up Africa for themselves. Then, you fast forward to 1945, the UN Security Council is created, cementing the post-war power structure. The legacy of both of these moments is exactly the same. The world's most important tables were designed from the very beginning with a whole lot of chairs missing. Let's just double-click on that Berlin conference for a second. The fate of an entire continent was being decided. So how many Africans were in that room? 0. Not a single ruler, not one delegate, not one observer was there to speak for the millions of people whose lives were being redrawn on a map. And this isn't just ancient history. That legacy of exclusion is still with us. You see it right here in the UN Security Council. It has 5 permanent members. Europe, with a population of less than 500 million, holds 2 of those seats. Africa, home to 1.4 billion people, 0. So when established powers act shocked that Africa is demanding a bigger voice, should anyone really be surprised? And that brings us right back to today, and to the modern battlefield for representation, the G20. The G20 started out as a forum for the world's biggest economies to coordinate on policy. By 2008, it had pretty much become the main event, the premier table for international economic cooperation. It's supposed to be where the big decisions are made. But the G20 structure always had this obvious imbalance. The European Union has a seat, and then France, Germany, and Italy have their own seats too. So that's 4 voices for Europe right there. Meanwhile, until very recently, the entire continent of Africa had just one, South Africa. But then, in 2023, the whole dynamic shifted. After years of lobbying, the African Union, which represents the entire continent, was finally made a permanent member of the G20. And that single decision set the stage for the whole confrontation. Because in 2025, when it was South Africa's turn to take over the G20 presidency, they decided to do something really bold. They used their new leverage to make a radical statement of inclusion.
They sent out 42 invitations. Yeah, you heard that right. Not just the usual 20 members, but dozens of guests. African nations that had never been at the table before, Caribbean states, Pacific Island nations. It was a deliberate act to blow the doors of this exclusive club wide open.
And South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, was not subtle about it at all. He basically said the quiet part out loud. This was all about fundamentally changing the conversation and putting Africa's priorities at the very center of it all. But look, inviting more guests wasn't just about throwing a bigger party. It was a calculated geopolitical move. South Africa wasn't just hosting a summit, it was playing chess, not checkers, executing a coordinated strategy across multiple fronts. And here's what I mean. Just look at this 3-layer strategy. First, use the G20 presidency itself to set the agenda. Second, leverage the African Union's brand new seat to speak for all 55 nations as a single bloc. And third, use its position in BRICS, the economic group with Brazil, Russia, India, and China, to build up alternative forums that challenge the old systems. So while Washington was trying to shrink the table, Pretoria was busy building new ones. And their agenda was crystal clear. They focused on 4 key areas: getting real money for climate disasters, which hit Africa the hardest, finding solutions for the crushing debt that so many nations face, making sure a move to green energy doesn't kill jobs, And, this is a big one, making sure Africa gets to process its own critical minerals instead of just exporting raw materials.
So what's the upshot of this whole standoff? Well, the Johannesburg Summit might be over, but this story is far from finished. This was either a historic turning point or it was just another symbolic gesture.
President Ramaphosa really framed the whole thing in these terms. He argued that this isn't about power or efficiency, it's about a basic principle of equality, that no nation should be able to bully another just because it's bigger or richer. And this leaves us with some critical questions for the future, right? Is the African Union actually going to use its new power to reshape G20 policy, or is it just going to get sidelined? Can African nations finally lock in better terms on debt and trade? Or will this all be remembered as just a well-hosted party that, in the end, didn't really change anything?
Which brings us to the final crucial point. You simply cannot ignore 1.4 billion people, a number that's on track to become 2.5 billion. If every attempt by the Global South to broaden the table is met with mockery and resistance, they won't stop asking for a seat. They will simply build their own table. And maybe that's already happening.